Hey, I'm Lexi, and this is what you should know. So there's actually been a little bit of buzz lately in the South Australian true crime community, which is actually quite exciting because what has happened recently, the case for 19-year-old Amber Hay, who went missing 20 years ago, is finally coming to a close. So what has happened is a man and a woman has been arrested in the Riverina by homicide squad detectives, and it's likely going to end in a murder charge with a trial. I will keep an ear out for that one so that way I can provide further information, but I just thought that was quite interesting that this is coming to a close. And it honestly appears a lot of cases are coming to a close recently. I mean, not an Australian case, but the Madeleine McCann case is coming to a close. And I feel like the case of William Tyrrell is coming to a close as well. So there's going to be answers for that. And I am so excited for justice to be found. And then, with any luck, because I don't think any of us are living with the delusion that William's still alive, he will be able to rest in peace. But to get down to it, you have had a week since listening to the Eric Cooke episode. I have had 2 weeks to cleanse our brains from this. We shall get into what is just as bad, if I'm perfectly honest. Because what is a serial killer without people being wrongfully convicted of some of those murders? Add to it, the police seemed too proud to admit that they were wrong. So this is what you should know about Darryl Beamish and John Button. To refresh your memory, Gillian Brewer, the Freddo Frog heiress, was murdered late at night on the 19th of December 1959 in the bedroom of her ground floor flat in Brookwood. Gillian spent the evening of the 19th, which was a Saturday, in the flat with her fiancé. At about 11:30 p.m., the couple retired to the bedroom. At midnight, her fiancé left and didn't return until 9 a.m. the next morning to collect her for a game of golf, where he then found her dead body on the bed where he had left her sleeping. She was lying on her back. There was no sign of any struggle, and she had been struck several times on the head, throat, and lower body with a tomahawk, and stabbed several times in the breast and stomach with a pair of dressmaking scissors. Enter Darryl Beamish. On the 7th of April, 1961, a young deaf mute was pressed to plead guilty. Don't get me wrong, Darryl is by no stretch a saint, and I will give you a heads up, skip a couple of times if you are squeamish, especially when it comes to crimes against young children. He was at the Perth Police Court on 4 charges of aggravated assault on young girls. In each case, Darryl had enticed a young girl of 4 to 5 years old into his car, driven her to a secluded place, removed part of her clothing, and masturbated himself while handling the girl's vagina. I did warn you, it's a bit yucky. He definitely deserved a strict sentence for that, but was not guilty of murder. While Darryl was in custody until the afternoon to await sentencing, he was taken by Detective Sergeant Litch, who was in charge of the murder investigation, down to the flat where Gillian had been killed. They were accompanied by another detective named Deering, and by Mrs. Myatt, a public relations officer and interpreter for the Adult Deaf and Dumb Society. Darryl communicated with others through sign language and finger spelling, which he had learnt at school for the deaf and dumb. He could only utter a few words and could only hear shrill noises such as a whistle. While his vocabulary was limited, despite what has been reported elsewhere, his intelligence was not below normal, and his handwriting was quite fluent. He had held a driver's license for some years and worked for a living. At the flat, Litch asked Darryl whether he knew anything about Gillian's murder. At first he denied any knowledge of it, but on the way back to Perth in the police car, he allegedly said he wanted to tell the truth, that he had in fact killed Gillian. Later, Darryl gave a circumstantial account of the way he had gotten to the flat, attacked her with an axe and pair of scissors. He also led the police to the house from which he had taken the tomahawk. The following day, Detective Litch, again accompanied by Mrs. Meyer and Detective Deering, put a series of written questions to Darryl to make sure that he understood each question. Mrs. Meyer also signed them to him. His written answers to these questions substantially confirmed his oral statement of the previous day. Later that same day, he was seen to write something on the bitumen floor of the exercise yard of the police station, which included the line, "I killed lady." 2 months later, on the 12th of June, Darryl was interviewed again in the Fremantle prison, where he was serving a sentence of 7 months imprisonment for the assaults of which he had been convicted of on the 7th of April, 1961. On this occasion, it was put forward again that the questions had been answered without mental stress. 4 days later, on the 16th of June 1961, Darryl was charged with the willful murder of Gillian Brewer. At his trial in August 1961, the evidence against Darryl Beamish consisted of these 4 confessions. His defense was that they were untrue and that Detective Litch had threatened and teased him into making them, with the assistance of Mrs. Myatt. He denied any knowledge of the murder until he was told of it by Mrs. Myatt on the 7th of April 1961. Apart from denying that he admitted to killing Gillian and what he wrote on the floor of the exercise yard on the 8th of April, Darryl did not deny that he made statements shown as evidence, but instead explained these details were either guessed or that Mrs. Myatt told him to write that answer. However, the jury found him guilty of willful murder with a strong recommendation to mercy, and he was sentenced to death. Thankfully, the death sentence was eventually commuted to life in prison. Moving on to the next person, John Button was celebrating his 19th birthday by having dinner at his parents' home. It had been pleasant until he and his girlfriend, Rosemary, aged 17, had a tiff. What had happened was they were eating and John saw a hand reach over to steal food from his plate. Thinking it was his brother, he snapped, saying to get out of his food. Rosemary reacted and was upset. Leaving the house, she started to walk home. John jumped into his car and followed her, pleading with her to get in and begging for forgiveness. But she was determined to walk. John has deeply regretted since watching her walk away. He figured this would be an argument that could be laughed off later, and that she could cool down. He stopped the car, lit a cigarette, and waited. He knew that on the other side was a deserted industrial strip. After he finished his cigarette, John decided to see if he could find her, hoping she would have calmed down. But he spotted her, lying in the sand several meters from the road, fatally injured. Fearing there being a crazed hit-and-run driver at large, he carried his bleeding girlfriend to his car and rushed her to a doctor's surgery. The doctor called an ambulance and the police. When the cops arrived, they noticed damage to the left corner of John's car. He told them he had been in a minor accident when he ran into the back of a Ford 3 weeks before, and had not had the damage fixed as of yet. The police turned up a report of this accident, but decided it still looked suspicious. They figured that since he was the boyfriend and that there had been an argument, that he was guilty of having run her over in what they figured was a fit of rage. John also had a bad stutter, which investigating police took as a nervous twitch at the questions he was being asked. 5 hours into being questioned, an officer came in and bluntly told him that Rosemary had passed away due to her injuries. John broke down and gave up, signing a confession that had been typed out by a detective. The jury at his trial was kind enough to only convict him of manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 10 years hard labor. Had he been convicted of willful murder, he could have hanged. It was 4 months later, after John Button's arrest, when Eric Cooke confessed to 8 murders, including the killing of Rosemary Anderson. He provided great detail of seeing her, waited for the traffic to clear up, then lined her up with the car he had also stolen that night. How she flew over the bonnet, over the roof, and disappeared. He drove the car to a park 3 kilometers away and crashed it into a tree to disguise the damage. The owner of the car was contacted, and the police records confirmed that his car was found crashed into a tree at Kings Park the next morning, just as he had described. As you would expect, John appealed on the basis of this confession. Eric even gave evidence at the appeal, but the judges refused to believe anything he said. They said he was inventing a story to delay the death sentence he had been handed for the other murders. I also think that it is likely the justice system did not want to believe that they had done wrong. John Button was released from jail after 5 years, but never gave up trying to clear his name. On the 31st of May, 2001, John appealed his sentence again. On the 25th of February, 2002, his sentence was finally overturned, and John Button finally had his name cleared. The appeal judge's decision was based on the fresh forensic evidence obtained by the publisher of the book, Broken Lives, which is a deep dive into the wrongful convictions of Darryl Beamish and John Button. In this, and now widely reported that John's car was not involved in Rosemary's death. The Western Australian government approved a $460,000 compensation payment to John Button in recognition of the serious injustice that he had suffered in being convicted and jailed for manslaughter of Rosemary Anderson. Darryl Beamish was in prison for 15 years and was let out on parole, and in 2004, Darryl launched his sixth and final appeal to clear his name, and was finally successful. This was made official in April of 2005. In an interview shortly after being cleared, Darryl was quoted as saying, "All I ever wanted was truth and justice. I have just wanted everyone to know for sure that I did not kill anyone. Now they know. The appeal court judges say that they believe me. I always told the truth. The deaf have many problems in being understood by people that can hear. There are always mix-ups. I did not understand what was happening at the police station or at my trial in court." Darryl openly thanked his family, friends, and legal team. He also praised the bravery of Eric's widow Sally and her children, saying, "Bravest of all have been Eric Cooke's family, most of all his widow Sally, and his eldest son Tony." John Button attended court for Darryl's appeal decision and said that he was delighted, and was quoted as saying, "It is a great day for us both. I know Darryl would have ached in his heart for years and years and wondered, is this ever going to happen? Is it ever possible to have it overturned?" On the 2nd of June, 2011, 50 years after his conviction, Darryl was granted a $425,000 compensation payment by the Western Australia government. However, it has been stated that while the compensation has been helpful, it will not give back the years that these men were robbed of. Not just by years spent in prison, but the years they spent being tarred with a guilty verdict that did not belong to them. Tony Cooke was also in attendance for Darryl's decision and spoke of his satisfaction at what was finally the end of the nightmarish saga, and was quoted as saying, "The gap between the law and justice has finally been closed." While that is a beautiful statement, the gap has not closed fully. No one knows exactly how many people in Australia have been sentenced for crimes that they did not commit, but there is evidence that nearly 100 cases of wrongful convictions have been made since 1922. To me, this sounds quite low, but to those working on the front lines of criminal justice reform, warn that the number could be significantly higher. That also being said, there is also statistics in guilty parties walking free or not being charged with that specific offence, causing a mass build-up in cold cases. There is a large gap in our legal system, Australia. The cause of this comes from many places. Laziness, racism, sexism, or an unstated conflict of interest. This has also been seen in the case of the Barraville murders, where the killer has walked free due to a mix of racism, sexism, and lazy police work. I'm not saying all police are lazy, I'm saying, as it is in the true crime world, sometimes they fuck up, and sometimes they just don't want to admit to it, because it's embarrassing. And with that, I will get off my soapbox and leave it here for this week. I know this was a short episode, but every so often there is going to be a short episode, because there's just not a ton of information out there that would be relevant otherwise. There will be pictures referring to this case on Facebook and Instagram, as always it is under What You Should Know Australia. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me or send through a case request to whatyoushouldknowaustralia@gmail.com, or you can even message me on Facebook or Instagram. I promise I am quite responsive. I do suggest picking up a copy of Broken Lives by Estelle Blackburn if you want a deeper dive than I have provided here. It is quite an interesting book. But until next week, stay safe and stay hydrated. Bye!